Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this session of ours at Multimodal 2023. My name is Chris de Sachs. I'm Head of Sustainability at Zeus. If you're not familiar with us, we're a freight startup with a focus on sustainable freight based in London. We help businesses decarbonize their supply chain through alternative fuels, modal shift, and ultimately electrification. And so this topic of sustainable freight is really close to our heart. So I'm really pleased to be chairing this panel discussion today. Hopefully you'll hear less of me and more from our experts in the panel. But to kick us off, I'd just like to kind of set the context a little bit. So broadly speaking, we'll be talking about sustainable freight, but specifically we will be talking about two things in particular. So the first is the roadblocks that stand between us reaching net zero in 2050 in the sector. And secondly, we're going to be talking about the business case. Can we make a business case for this transition to net zero? Because at the moment, it's looking like a lot of this transition is going to be very expensive. And so to give some context, perhaps from the road freight sector, which is my own background, historically, it's been an easy sell. Things like low rolling resistance tires, aero trailers, all these things, they save you fuel, and so they save you money. And as a bonus, you save on emissions. So the business case was quite clear. But looking forwards now to biofuels and ultimately electrification and charging infrastructure, it all looks really expensive. And so the business case is now less clear and is much more of a challenge. So hence our discussion today. I will let our guests introduce themselves. If you can give your name, your organization, a little bit about what you do, and maybe just highlight one of the big roadblocks that you've seen from your experience.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning. My name's John Trenchard. I work with DP World. I'm the Commercial and Supply Chain Director, covering two world-class ports in the United Kingdom at London Gateway and Southampton. One of the things we're trying to do is to frame the word port and perhaps think of it more as a logistics hub, as we're connecting between modal choices for our customers. Specifically on sustainable freight, we've done sort of 4 steps to look at this. One is to have a strategy and measure our baseline, so we actually know what we're starting with in terms of decarbonisation, so that Lloyd's accreditation and the like. 2 is to start decarbonising our operations. So we've moved completely fossil fuel from Southampton. We're with HVO, and we've reduced our CO2 footprint by around 80%. And we've also invested in electrification of operations at London Gateway, where we're investing. And I think there's going to be a press release in about 1 hour's time for a big investment of fully electric straddle carriers, which is going out as well. The third thing we've done is we started looking at supplying electric to our customers. So we're exploring how we can actually provide landside power for ships, and also for the trucks that are visiting our facilities, to provide capabilities to have charging points and facilities for drivers. And the fourth one, which is rather interesting, and we'll perhaps follow up a little bit later on, is providing choices between transport modes for customers to perhaps nudge or provide options which are a little bit more sustainable in terms of the choices for our customers. And in terms of roadblocks, I would say having a price on CO2 or a value on CO2 is quite important. Data exchange and visibility on CO2. And one thing which I think all of us need to think about is perhaps leadership. Are we prepared to try something new? Are we prepared to lean in? Because if we don't do something different, we're going to continue getting the same result. And I think leadership there and being prepared to take a punt is something which like-minded people across the industry, I think we need to think about how we do that. Sorry, Chris.
Thank you so much, John. Ismi?
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the invite. Good morning. My name is Hizmi Hassan. I'm the Chief Digital and Supply Chain Officer at Apollo Tyres. So Apollo Tyres is India's largest tyre manufacturer with a large presence in Europe through an acquisition of a Dutch brand called Redestein. So I know it's not household names, but we do shift a lot of tyres around the world. So in terms of sustainability, as most manufacturers have started their net zero by looking at recycled input material. So we're now starting to produce tyres using recycled rubber. But one of the biggest challenges that all manufacturers have is what's called scope 3 emission. This is emission that happens beyond our four walls of our supply chain. And certainly, moving tires is a big emission for us indirectly. And it's an area that we're starting to look at. And as John said, that, there are some real challenges that the world will go through to achieve net zero, and particularly the freight industry and the whole trucking industry as well. And I think the biggest challenge is scale. We're going to go through a period where there's no scale. Okay, and how do we generate the right economic value when there's no scale? And lack of scale means lack of supply. Lack of supply means high prices. So for us as shippers, if I want to get net zero in moving goods from A to B, it's significantly more expensive per tire than the the traditional methods. Okay, so I think how do we get scale will really depend on both intervention and incentives from governments, but also through partnership. There is no single player, whether it is a DP World or a Maersk or a Apollo Tires, who's going to achieve this. Partnership means we have to be willing to share data. Okay, I was yesterday at a World Economic Forum talking about how do you get sustainability into automotive, and the biggest discussion was on sharing data. When it comes to asking individual OEMs, will you share data? They said, oh, no, not really. But I think there is an overriding acceptance that by sharing data, we'll understand where there's inefficiencies, how can we drive inefficiencies out in this transition process and make it more economical.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hismi. Elsa?
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Elsa Dorman. I'm a consultant at Sancroft. We're a strategic sustainability consultancy. And for over 25 years, we've been helping business leaders and investors deliver safe, just, and sustainable profits. Our relationship with the logistics industry is threefold. Firstly, all of our clients cross-sector, whenever we're addressing sustainability with them, logistics is a major part of that conversation. It's a major factor to their greenhouse gas emissions, and it needs to come into their sustainability strategy if they're going to make progress there. Secondly, we work directly with the logistics and transport industry. So, for example, we work with a multimodal commodity trading company, and we help them make sure that their operations are as sustainable as possible, conducting materiality assessments and also helping them with their sustainability reporting as well. And finally, we work with the investors that are investing in the logistics industry too. So, for example, I work with a real estate investor and asset manager, and they have invested in a kind of collaboration center where they'll be essentially sharing logistics assets across their industry. And that's a really important part that, as we've said, the stakeholder engagement there. For me, my view to the kind of biggest roadblock in sustainable freight is probably the cost associated with investing in these new technologies that are often still waiting to be implemented at scale. It's a big upfront investment. So what can we do in the meantime to make sure that we're acting now and we're preparing for that future investment to make sure that we're going to reach our climate targets?
Thank you so much, Elsa. Alistair, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. So good morning, everybody. My name is Alistair Barnes. I've got an engineering technical background. I've worked in aerospace and in batteries. And now I find myself more recently in transport and more specifically looking at transport decarbonisation of heavy goods vehicles. So I work for Innovate UK, which is the UK's innovation agency. We're part of the UK Research and Innovation Group. So we work with a number of different research councils, some focused more on academic and working with universities. And then Innovate UK is the agency that funds business-led research and development. And what I mean by that is we work with a range of different government departments, such as the Department for Transport, the Department for Business and Trade, and the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles, and we deliver taxpayer funding. So we work closely with organisations that are looking at solving strategically important challenges, and we work with them to encourage them to do things quicker and faster. And in my work, I also work with the Advanced Propulsion Centre on the Automotive Transformation Fund, so looking at, say, gigafactories and motor factories and all those sorts of developments that are needed to electrify the UK's automotive supply chain. So just on roadblocks, Chris, this is what you asked about earlier, and I think from my perspective, there's a real need for a clearer direction in technology. And I'm generally thinking here about the different potential technologies that will be everyday technologies for heavy goods vehicles in the future. And without that direction, I think it's really difficult to know for companies to know how they can invest and roll out new vehicles. So I'm keen to see some more focused policy, not in the sense of telling people what they should do or shouldn't do, but in terms of making noise about investments that are happening publicly and privately around, say, heavy goods vehicle charging. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alistair. So to kick off our panel discussion questions, I'd like to start with Elsa. I mentioned in my introduction that, historically we had all these efficiency gains that helped reduce costs and also reduce emissions. And I kind of said that we've exhausted a lot of those opportunities already. Is that a fair thing to say, or is there still something businesses can do in the short term to eke out as much kind of efficiency improvements as possible before we start looking at some of these more expensive kind of technological interventions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'd say I'd disagree that there was still a huge opportunity to look at existing systems and business models and find more efficiencies and more sustainable ways of approaching things. I've got a few stats here. We work with Cambridge Institute for Manufacturing, and they're running a number of different pilots with existing factories. And what they've seen is that overall, they can find 20% energy efficiencies and 35% waste efficiencies there. If we kind of transpose that to the logistics sector, there's an opportunity for digital technologies, particularly in the shipping sector. The stat has proved that digital tools to increase energy efficiency within the shipping sector can result in 15% of the greenhouse gas emissions reduction that we'll need by 2050. You've also got the likes of road freight, where 90% of the emission of the total life cycle of the truck, so that's from the creation to the use to the kind of end of life, is actually from the fossil fuels used for propulsion. And in Europe, 30% of heavy good vehicles are operating, or heavy good vehicles are operating empty 30% of that time. So those stats prove that there's a huge kind of potential for efficiency drivings here. And I think when you're thinking about the cost of, looking back into your systems and conducting that kind of analysis, again, you've got to think about, well, what's the cost to my business if I'm not doing this? If I'm not meeting regulation, if I'm not making the changes required to make my business more resilient, or even if I'm being hurried into those changes or unprepared when looking at disclosure, what does that mean for you? And actually, the implication goes beyond cost. It's legal, it's regulatory, so it's really important to factor that in. I think also what's useful to consider is the urgency of action required. The greenhouse gas, particularly carbon emissions that we're emitting today, we won't feel the effects of that for 50 years' time. So we need to be acting now. Businesses are already feeling the pressure from consumers, from regulatory bodies, and also you're seeing the effects of climate change within your business directly now, particularly within your supply chain. So by focusing on those efficiencies in existing systems, you can have a quick impact. Yes, it takes resource and effort, but it means that you're not having to make investments in the kind of alternative fuels or new technologies, which might be a little bit further out right now. I think it's still a really important factor to consider, but there's stuff that we can be doing in the here and now.
Okay. So your point on alternative fuels was what I wanted to come on to next. So our experience at Zeus, we have used, for example, HVO, which is a relatively low-cost alternative biofuel, a drop-in solution for existing diesel trucks. And there's a price premium associated with it, depending on what the market's doing at the time. Maybe that's 15%, maybe it's 20%. So relative to electric trucks, it's a pretty attractive option, and yet we still see, in the procurement process, companies shying away from that because cost is king. And these also happen to be companies with, publicly at least, very strong green ambitions and targets and things. But when it comes to the crunch, procurement is still going with the lowest cost option. What do you think businesses can or should be doing in that space to bridge the gap between sustainability agendas and actually procuring logistics services?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is where double materiality or just materiality assessments play a really key role. So essentially what that is a prioritization exercise where you're looking at the environmental, social, and governance issues that are impacting your business and your bottom line, but also the way that your business impacts the economy, the environment, and the people that you're kind of affecting. And that's really important because it helps you to direct your resource. And it does this over a short, medium to long term. So there will be value to investing in more expensive alternative fuels, perhaps in the future, once you've seen that implementation and that scale, and it feels like a sure investment. It will also help to direct your shorter term resource to those efficiency driving exercises that you can do. Reporting requirements, particularly sustainability reporting requirements. You've got the likes of CSRD, so Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and also GRI, so the Global Reporting Initiative, which are requiring these materiality assessments as part of their mandatory, in the case of CSRD, reporting requirements. So it's something that you're going to have to be doing anyway. And it provides a really good opportunity for you to look at your business's resources and put together a real action plan as to where they should be focused across those different short to medium and long terms.
Thanks. John, you wanted to add something?
Sorry, I was just going to, is this working? I was just going to add on a very practical level, we transitioned to HVO, hydro-treated vegetable oil, in operations in Southampton a good sort of 18 months ago now. And the premium is about 40 pence a litre to pay for that green premium. And one of the things we did, we instigated something called an energy transition contribution, which we actually put on our tariffs. And those of you who are shipping through the port of Southampton with containers, thank you very much for allowing us to make that conversion so that your containers are actually going with completely fossil-free fuel. It's a small contribution, but it's allowed us to reduce over 16,000 tons of CO2 on a basis. And your imports that you're doing are now no longer doing 55 kilos of CO2 per full cycle, and are now down to 7. It's not enough. We need to do more, but it's a step in the right direction, and it can be done.
Thanks, that's great, John. And I want to step a little bit further into our kind of pathway towards net zero. So Alistair, I want to come to you now. We've got biofuels as depending on who you speak to, a kind of transition solution. Ultimately, I think we're heading towards electrification of some sort, and the price premiums there are significantly higher. Last year, we saw some of the major European OEMs launch their first electric 40-ton truck tractors, and depending on who you speak to, they're around 3 times the price of a diesel equivalent. So in your view, how do you see that panning out? How and when will these kinds of vehicles become affordable?
Sure. So there are plenty of roadmaps that talk about vehicle pricing and battery pricing, and you can kind of look at prices in the future. They will come down, but probably not anywhere near the extent that a diesel HGV costs today. And then really what I think people need to do is factor in the total cost of ownership. And I don't just mean that on a individual vehicle basis, but I mean around really looking at their operations, working with their customers and maybe their customers' customers, and trying to understand where the opportunities are to use those vehicles. There will be use cases today that are financially viable, and maybe in a couple of years there'll be many more, and that will gradually happen. And there are plenty of studies now that talk about sort of a tipping point in the mid 2030s for a huge amount of operations being more cost effective with a zero emission, with a battery electric heavy goods vehicle than a diesel heavy goods vehicle. So total cost of ownership, but not just on an individual vehicle basis.
So, valid point. But I guess to your, let's say your SMEs, even if there's a good total cost of ownership proposition, it's still a huge upfront capital cost. So, I guess what we expect to see, and we're already seeing, is that it's your big shippers or hauliers with deep pockets. They're starting to invest in these vehicles, and they're starting to benefit from the learnings of how this is going to integrate into their logistics system and where they're going to start installing chargers and that sort of thing. So will SMEs kind of organically follow suit in the years to come?
I think there's a really significant challenge for SMEs that is probably being underestimated by in government at the moment. So I really want to see some more help on the infrastructure side, particularly. A lot of vehicles will be returned to base and will use depot-based recharging or refueling. That's really important, but it's really difficult if you're an SME, if you're an owner-operator, or you've only got a couple of vehicles. And it'd be really good to see more commercial landlords looking at solar and battery storage and whatever they need to enable decent power delivery for vehicles overnight. But then I also want to see the public charging. Passenger cars are not a perfect comparison by any means, but we know that public charging is going to be important for some operations. And that's so far out of the skill set and the capability, I think, for a lot of operators in general, not just SMEs, that it'd be really good to see more support and more private investment around that public charging side.
Right, thank you. And then sticking on the topic of electric trucks, Ismi, I want to come to you now. So you're a manufacturer. So your view of sustainability, as you mentioned, you look at kind of circular economy and sustainability in your materials and all that sort of thing. What's your view of increased costs around sustainable HGVs in your distribution? You said that's important for your Scope 3 emissions. Are you willing to pay more for these cleaner logistics services?
I think to be absolutely brutally honest, I don't think any manufacturer is willing to pay more. And particularly if you're a public company, you are held against profit targets and margins, etc. So I think that's the brutal reality. But let me pick up something that Elsa said, which she said that 30% of the freight here in the UK goes empty. And I also read a scary statistics that the 70% that is going with freight is going on average 60% full. So you just do the maths. 50% of freight is going with is carrying free air or just air. If you can actually fill that up, you can halve CO2 emission. So you don't have to do anything clever. You can literally halve CO2 emission. And that's what manufacturers want you guys to do. Help us, right? Help us be more efficient. And efficiency is not about doing the same thing better. It's actually doing things differently. And if you look at the the UK economy, where it's less and less dependent on manufacturing, and it's going to have even less share of manufacturing on EV, whether it's trucks or passenger cars, it needs to be very clever in doing things differently to drive productivity. And I think this is where something like a data and digital plays. And I know we are partnering with Zeus on some digital work, and I like companies like Zeus because what they're going to do is to bring shine the light on these inefficiencies and help create a platform to work differently for us manufacturers. I mean, one challenge I'll ask all of you all to do is, why not get together and talk about sharing data when you're moving trucks empty? Put it into a public platform, so we can all be efficient collectively.
Well,
And do you mind
sorry,
if I
Elsa wants to
jump
add something.
in?
Yep. Go ahead.
I think that's a really important point that you've made there, because the cost savings that you'll be achieving by making your processes and systems more sustainable, you will then be able to reinvest into kind of additional sustainable support, whether that's alternative fuels or kind of your more forward-looking solutions. I think it's also important when you consider cost to see to understand who is shouldering that cost. A lot of the time it lands on the consumer. We see it across most of the sectors that we work with, particularly, for example, the food sector. But one strong example of this is actually, if you think about the ULEZ zone in London, that's typically the poorer consumer is going to be shouldering that cost because they're less likely to live near good transport links and will be more likely to have to use fossil fuel-based cars. That's just a kind of small example, but I think it could probably be scaled up for the wider logistics industry as well.
Just to put a point to that is, I think at some point, government will come out with legislation. There will be taxation, there will be legislation that will force manufacturers and the supply chain to start taking on and absorbing the cost of driving towards net zero. Because you're right, at the end, it will be difficult to get the consumers to absorb everything. So, to finish off my point, so we are using efficiency to release margins, and then, yes, use that to drive sustainability, because we know that at the end, in manufacturing, one, legislation is going to push us there, and second, it is a competitive advantage if we can sell a sustainable tire.
Yeah, and I'd like to come back to that point in a little bit around visibility and data sharing and regulation and how that's going to move this forward. But before we get a little bit too far away from electric trucks, John, I wanted to bring you in here for a moment. You mentioned in your introduction that you are, as a port operator, making some preparations for electric trucks. Can you tell us a bit more about what you're doing there and what needs to be done in the sector?
Okay, so as a port operator, we have our own sort of port operation area, and we are using electric vehicles there because it's our own environment that we can manage. And we've invested quite heavily in electric vehicles, and there's more investments to come. One point that I do want to mention about the technology and your point about using things differently is that we currently have the opportunity to make a difference now with the technology we've already got. So we're sat here in Birmingham, and if you ship a box, an import container, 20 tons from Southampton or London Gateway to Birmingham, if you put that on a road delivery, or you put that on a rail and a road delivery, the rail-road combination emits 250 grams of CO2, 250 kilograms of CO2 less than doing road alone. Currently, there are over 500 rail wagons not being used, parked up, not being used to do this freight. So at DP World, we've decided to make an innovative approach, and we have introduced a modal shift program. And we will, from the 1st of September, start a trial where if your import container goes within 140 miles of the port by rail, we will pay you an incentive of £70 per rail container towards the cost of your freight. Now, given the fact that the sea freight from Asia to the United Kingdom is now around about $1,000, and £70 is about $100, that's 10% of your sea freight. There is a possibility here to really drive road to rail. And this is not road competing with rail. This is rail and road working together, because the final mile will always be road. We currently do 25% of our shipments from Southampton by rail. The addressable market is around 40%. If we, using collaborative advantage as members of the supply chain, can actually get that proportion up on rail, we could save 30,000 tons of CO2 for the UK economy this year. That's 22,000 family cars off the road. That's 7 million HGV miles on the A34 removed. I ask you, as members of multimodal, to lean in and think about how you can leverage this opportunity, how you can be part of this solution as well. It's not going to be perfect, and we will learn on the way, because there are, I'm sure, going to be unintended consequences. But please think about how this could affect your business and how you could be part of the conversation.
Thanks, John. So modal shift is obviously core to all of this. It needs to happen in parallel with electrification and logistics innovation. What has prevented modal shift historically? Why is it not where it should be? Why do we have empty capacity? And do you see this competing with electrification or vice versa?
Okay, I'll start with the first one. So this is not competing with electrification. This is complementary. So the electric trucks which are being developed are relatively short capability. We've got drivers needing to get back at the end of their shifts. This could be a sort of a way of doing a hub and spoke system on and using the electricity trucks which are there. In terms of why we've seen a decline from previous levels of high 30% down to 25%, quite frankly, the HG vehicle is a very, very efficient piece of kit. It gives flexibility. You can use it all over the place. But I'm afraid to say it is not the solution for the economy that we've got moving forward. If we are going to hit the Paris targets, which were signed up, the global economy, year on year, has to save 9% of CO2 each and every year. And we do need to wait for these technological advancements, but we also need to make do with what we've got at the moment, and there are some options to get there. So there is rolling stock, there is space. I think the question really is, do you really need that box 24 hours after making your booking when it's landed in the United Kingdom, or can you wait 72 hours? Now, given the fact that you ordered it 10 weeks ago, it spent 3 weeks being constructed in China and has spent 6 weeks on the water, maybe there's an opportunity to accept a 72-hour delivery profile as opposed to a 24-hour delivery profile. But that's one of the barriers.
Cool, thank you. And then back to trucks. Alistair, I want to bring you in here. I've talked about electrification, but there are obviously other things, and a lot of these things need government support by way of incentives or tax support, or potentially weights and dimensions, regulation changes. Very broad question, but what's your view on what is being done and what should be done by governments going forwards? And I know you're not representing government, you're just our panelist with the most kind of information about what the government might be thinking.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Chris. I get asked this question quite a lot, and I often push back slightly, really, because I think that government's role in this and a lot of other things, without getting too political, is to enable the private sector to invest. So the amount of investment that's needed to do all of these things that we're talking about is colossal. It's billions, it's trillions, and it's not something that we really, I think, as taxpayers would want to individually be funding. So I think the really important thing is to enable business to invest. So we already see some changes around weights and dimensions for aero. And on the weight side, it's derogations that allow a heavier vehicle, if it's zero emission, to have a higher plated weight, or whatever the correct terminology is. And that's really good, although I know it doesn't go beyond 44 tons. It still sits there as a sort of top cap. But that sort of green ton is really important and helps to address some of the challenges with these technologies. And I guess on the other angle, it's that sort of piece that the government do to try and kickstart the deployment and kickstart the learning. So one of the things I've been involved with for many years is the Zero Emission Road Freight Demonstration Programme, which is a £200 million partnership with the Department for Transport, where Innovate UK works as the delivery partner. And through that, we're starting to get vehicles on the road relatively soon, but not just sort of small numbers and trial deployments, but in a really large scale deployment.
And in terms of the time scale and how that's going to inform government policy, so the trials are scheduled to run for 7 years, correct? Obviously, we can't wait 7 years for kind of those research results and policy implications to come through. Do we expect that there's going to be some updates alongside that based on early data?
Yes, so to give just a little bit more detail, the plan is for projects to start very soon. So it's a little bit behind schedule at the moment, but projects getting underway very soon, and hopefully a public announcement in the next couple of weeks or maybe months about who is going to be running those projects and what they're going to be doing and where they're going to be doing it. So that will mean that they will start to source vehicles in the next couple of months and into the next few years, and should put vehicles in decent numbers on the road by sort of mid-2025. So it's probably hundreds of heavy goods vehicles, likely a sort of a slight bias towards battery electric, because that's what is probably most important for the vast majority of operations. But in terms of your question around learning and when it will come for it, we definitely can't wait until the end of those demonstrations to really understand what has been learned from it. So Innovate UK is sourcing a supplier who's going to lead a sort of a data collection and technical evaluation activity, and they will have regular opportunities, maybe 6 monthly, to disseminate that learning, and that will start as soon as possible. So, you know, what can we know? What can we learn from looking at the diesel operations already? Looking at maybe the prices of vehicles, looking at the sites and their capability to have grid upgrades and high power chargers. So as soon as possible, we're going to start spreading that learning out. And because it's public funding, it's really important that it's not just those who are directly involved and who are doing these projects. It's really important that those who are much wider and you know, outside of the program, still benefiting from what the program is doing.
Cool, thank you. Then I think maybe one kind of final discussion point before we hand over for some audience questions is just to come back to this point that's been raised several times around companies are going to be forced into doing Scope 3 emissions reporting sooner rather than later, especially for the bigger companies. There are issues around data visibility and sharing between companies that historically they wouldn't necessarily be comfortable with. How are we going to navigate this? And maybe Hizmi, if you could start us off as a shipper, you know, you will be kind of core to this sharing of data up and down the value chain. What are your thoughts on that?
I think in the name of sustainability, it should be easy for companies who even compete with each other to share data. And it is, you know, at the moment, there's no norms, no best practice, nor are there common platforms or common standards for collecting this data, right? And as I said, I think it's really up to the industry to come together to create those standards and those norms. Because if they don't, I think the government will force that through, you know, through legislation around Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 reporting. Yeah. So when we get to that, then definitely we'll have to share the data. And not only that, we'll have to come up with a common standard, a metadata standard on how data can be shared and then reported in an aggregated way. You know? So it's a bit of a wait and see game at the moment. And really how the future will pan out, it's interesting.
Do you see that as potentially a competitive advantage by moving before the regulations tell you to do so? Would that be beneficial to you as a business?
Yeah, I think, I mean, if you want, certainly getting ahead of the legislation and getting into reporting and understanding where your emissions are happening and really addressing those through efficiency, through alternate forms of, let's say, modal transport and alternate forms of energy is definitely a competitive advantage, right? But it's still not, you know, even if you look at in retail, when you look at when consumers pay for something, they're still not willing to pay extra because this tire is, you know, from only sustainable raw material, and it was bought to the quick fit through a electric truck. Yeah, that's the challenge for us. So it's still internally all about, for a manufacturer and a shipper, about how do you become more efficient and generate margins to pay for it, because we're worried about sustainability coming. Sorry, about legislation.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and just jumping in here, I think it's interesting because there's going to be two kind of pressures. There's that internal pressure to collect data to prove that you are a sustainable business, that you're doing things efficiently, and that's where that competitor advantage comes from. And then there's that external pressure from your supply chain, who are will be mandated to report against scopes 1, 2, and 3 and other sustainability kind of metrics. And therefore, they're going to be putting pressure on you as a business, as part of their supply chain, to be able to provide them with that data. So if you can do that ahead of regulation, that's a real big plus for those other actors across your supply chain. And it means that they'll be more willing to collaborate and work with you in the future.
John, did you want to add something?
Yes, we keep talking about competitive advantage. I would propose that we think about collaborative advantage. If you're at the front of this, you actually do have a competitive advantage. If you're waiting to the middle of this is happening, it's table stakes. So, you know, we have to make these decisions and move forward. Yes, the legislation's there is movement going through, but there are things we can do to make a difference today. And I am slightly less pessimistic than you about customer choices, because I think that customers, if they are given a choice, will start voting with decisions. And I'm afraid they have to start voting for decisions if we're going to have the changes that we need to make over time.
And Alistair, any final comments?
Yes, I draw a parallel here with rules of origin in terms of manufacturing processes, and there's increased focus now on understanding your supply chain and, you know, where it's located geographically, but then also pairing in with that the emissions side of it. So I think we're seeing a lot of it already, and echoing the points that the panel have just made, it's going to be important. It's going to be increasingly high priority for different people. So I think the more that can be done now, the better. But I think, again, it's the SMEs and the smaller organizations that I think it's really difficult for, where they don't have that capability to have a head of sustainability or have a specialist in that area. So they're the ones I think need most help.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we've got certainly time for questions from the audience, and I think there will be a roaming microphone somewhere. I think we've got a first question over there. Please just give your name and organization first. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Andrew Padmore from Eggley Dar Group. Just to pick up the point, it's interesting that I agree with pretty much everything said, particularly but you know, digital data sharing, collaboration. You all sort of hit the right things. I think the one message is coming across really, really difficult for SMEs in this space. You know, they'll go last. It'll be driven by the big boys. It's just sort of fact check, I guess. The first electric HGV Arctics in the UK were procured and operated by you know, FSEW, who are a small SME freight forwarder. And of course, the reason they do this, you know, to pick up the point, absolutely it gives them competitive advantage. They got first mover advantage over the big boys. They can now work with bigger end clients and, you know, benefiting as a result. So I think, not to forget, you know, for any SMEs here, the one thing this gives you, if you embrace it, it is a leg up in terms of competitiveness if you get it right. And if you apply all of the sentiments that were provided by the panel to what low carbon trucks can do and not to diesels, then you've got a massive advantage. And you know, it's literally years ahead. So it was just to sort of throw that into the mix, really, that if you're an SME, lead it, because it's easier for you to lead it than it is for the big corporates.
That's a great comment. Thank you. Does anyone want to respond?
So my name's John, and I'm Commercial and Supply Chain Director for DB World. I am not Head of Sustainability. And I'm here because I believe in what's going on, but I'm here also because it is a value proposition to customers and like-minded customers. And your point about the value chain, Alistair, we're talking more and more about a values chain.
Yeah.
About how people want to do business and interact with themselves. And some of the business you've got, sir, sounds like you've got like-minded people who want to make a difference in the supply chain. So as an SME, this is completely sort of empowering as well to embrace it early.
Anyway,
Just to support the SME argument and then the value creation. Again, those brands, products that will have the margins to pay for it will be those who are leading it. And those are typically niche, low volume. And that's where the SMEs can certainly come in and provide that service. And we are seeing that. I mean, you'll probably see a Porsche would be somebody who would be first having sustainable tires only, yeah, as opposed to a Skoda, okay? So I think if you take that argument forward, that's where you're going to start seeing the value creation and probably where, as you said, the niche players can have an advantage.
Can I just respond as well? So from an innovation background, a lot of the work that I did was work with startups and SMEs and try and support them to communicate with larger corporates who are typically held back by red tape. If you're thinking about making systems changes within a large corporate organization, that's a much slower, harder process. You have the startups and you have SMEs that can make those changes much more quickly. And what's really important there is that you do lead that movement and you collaborate with those corporate organizations, those larger organizations who have the influence and often more resource to then implement that at scale across the industry.
Just very briefly, Andrew, I like your optimism. That deployment in South Wales is really good to see. I guess it's the challenge is for the SMEs is to have that capability and interest in making a change and using it as a market differentiator. I'd like to see more of that.
thank you. Another question at the back there, please.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Jonathan Natchi from Fujitsu. I agree again with all the comments that have been made, particularly the 30% empty running, 6% capacity. For years, people have been trying to fix that. I agree with data visibility and sharing. And there are a lot of systems that do both freight matching and data visibility. So why aren't they working? Why is not everyone using them?
Go ahead, Ismi.
Good question. Probably it's lack of awareness. Yeah. I think the haulier industry, I mean, you look at banking, right? Pretty much all of money transactions is now digitized and it's just so seamless. And maybe that's where the logistics industry needs to come together to create better awareness for people like us who ship to say, you know what, there's actually these platforms available. There are these different ways of operating, right? I mean, that said, I've also seen our own statistics on how inefficient we are in terms of freight and load factors. So we're now actually working with some digital organizations to optimize that because it's a no-brainer. Yeah. So I think one word, I think there's lack of awareness for particularly people like us who are your customers. Yeah.
Can I follow on with that, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm happy to talk to all of you and we'll take any questions as well because that's what we do. So I'm very happy to engage with you and improve that awareness. Thank you.
I might just add one small point to that. I think another issue is probably just the kind of baggage that comes with this decades-old sector and how it's been run previously and very paper-based, and there's just a way of doing things, and so there's a change management process that needs to happen.
If I could as well, actually, I suppose I feel a bit self-conscious here, working for an innovation agency, and you're saying that there's all these great developments, but it's quite hard to get them into the market. And I think actually one of the things that Innovate UK needs to do more of is to, I'm sure we funded many really clever platforms and systems over the years, but I think the kind of innovation commercialization side is sometimes lacking. So it's a valid point.
That is true. There are a lot of catapults out there that are helping join business and tech together, but there needs to be more done. And maybe they should be promoted at places like this.
It's much easier to drive disruption B2C than B2B because there's a lot of legacy and there's a lot of inertia, there's a lot of mindset change that needs to go through. Okay.
I think it's a fear. It needs a paradigm shift.
Great. Thank you. We've got time for more questions. There's one over here.
Hello, Ash from DHL Supply Chain. You mentioned a bit about the cost versus the sustainability. So what would be your advice if you have a customer that is very much more focused on the cost versus the sustainability? What would be your advice on that?
I'm happy to pick this one up because a lot of our clients come to us and say, you know, we know we need to kind of implement sustainable change, but ultimately our profitability in our business comes first, and we completely support that. Sustainable investment needs to make business sense. And I think that's where data becomes really important, because actually when you think about sustainability, it's reducing waste, it's making more efficient use out of resource. Ultimately, that makes business sense. It's also a new way of thinking. You'll be introduced to new ideas, new markets. That's bound to kind of increase the profitability of your business. When it comes down to the core of sustainability, it does have cost benefit as well. What's really important is getting that engagement internally on that line of thinking. And I think that's where the data comes in, measuring those changes that you are making and saying, well, you know, this is the ROI on that investment, so that you can, you know, use that momentum within your business.
Alistair, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just to say, I don't think the two really need to be thought of as mutually exclusive. I mean, if you're paying 10-15% more for your HVO than diesel, then it's pretty hard to do anything other than pass that cost on in some sort of green premium. But I think if we think just ever so slightly further into the future, if you can generate your own electricity at your depot and put it straight into your vehicles, and it's all behind the meter and lower cost, and you can change your operations around and maybe use a battery electric tractor in a way that really works it commercially, then you can do both. So let's not think of them as one and the other separately.
I think the differentiation there is that there's short-term profitability and then there's long-term profitability and sustainability.
May I just ask, how much is 1 ton of CO2 saving worth? Question to the audience, how much is 1 ton of CO2 worth? Any ideas? Shout out. £10, £20, £50, €100, €200, $250.
Or is it free currently?
Or is it free? If you offset your business travel tomorrow, you could go and do it on a website and do it for $400 a ton. If you buy a European offset, it might be $40 or €40. The IMO is talking about $150 a ton. There are inset projects which are talking about $900 a ton. The problem that we've got here is that we all have a different value for saving the future.
Great point there, John. Thank you. Can we take one final quick question? Gentlemen, sorry, at the front.
Hi, I'm Zoe from Fox Group. We were lucky enough to be able to invest in the first electric tipper vehicles in the UK. It's been a learning curve, most definitely, but I think something that we're coming up against now, we've ordered 6 more. We've got the return on investment just due to the very nature, because we can offer that zero carbon. When we brought it by rail and then we move it by truck, it really reduces it. However, we've now got a practical problem in the fact that we've ordered 6 more. We don't have the grid capacity in our location. So, you know, there's this huge push, but what are you supposed to do in those circumstances? We're lucky enough to have multiple depots, but not everybody's in that situation. So there's this huge push. So how do we get past that part of the situation?
If I can just add a quick comment to that, it's such an important issue and it's often overlooked. We're like, well, let's get some electric trucks and off we go. depending on the charging infrastructure that you need for that and your existing grid capacity at your warehouse or your depot or whatever, there's a lot more money that needs to be spent on upgrading those grid connections, and there's going to be a whole backlog sitting with the DNOs for rolling this out, irrespective of the cost. So this is a massive bottleneck. Who wants to field this? Alistair?
I don't have a solution, but I recognise the problem, and it's one that I hear talked about quite a lot. And there are lots of clever companies who do clever things with second-hand batteries that are cheap and can get you to get more out of your existing grid connection. It's a challenge I hear as well in terms of refuse collection vehicles, and there are lots of councils that have done a good job of getting some in, and then in order to get more in and completely transition their fleet, they hit the same barriers. So it's a big problem, and it's one that needs more attention.
Why don't people share their spare capacity?
Well,
Back to partnership, yeah?
I think location here plays an impact, and it might end up being less costly to kind of shift warehouses around than to pay for these large grid upgrades.
Operations, our main depot, we also got electric crusher. We ended up not being able to run that because of the grid capacity. But we're also next to Amazon. They don't have any spare grid capacity either because they've got all their electric vans. We're next to a council building, so they don't have any spare grid capacity. So it really is vocationally based. But for us, this is now becoming a huge problem.
Yeah.
How do you scale it?
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Let's just quickly move on to the last final question. Quick one. Gentleman at the back in the blue blazer.
Thanks very much. My name's Shaquille. I'm from a startup called Avata. We started out with a platform which automated data analysis. So we told businesses how to transition, etc., etc. We came across the problem with grid constraints that you just spoke of, and we're in talks to roll out a new product which solves many of the points that you just spoke of. But I think what we really need to do is understand the word opportunity, because there is so much of it with electrification, and I can't express that enough. At the very beginning, we started analysing business cases and going, oh, you know what, it just doesn't work there, it doesn't work there, wait a minute, there's so much operational downtime associated with charging, or there's the cost of the vehicle, or there's this, and there's this. There's so much opportunity, it's coming soon. We're in talks to provide solutions in the very words that Hisme said and to yourself across thousands of locations in the UK. What is needed is collaboration and work with all of these different industry organisations that you have. Instead of asking, are you a member of our association? It's £700 for a membership. Why don't they turn around and say, okay, can you really benefit my members? That's what's needed, and ultimately the industry will have the solutions that they need.
Cool. Thank you very much for that contribution. And with that, I think we need to wrap up. So please join me in thanking our 4 panelists for today.